Why is it that Palestine has always been a source of trouble to the world? Ever since the days of the Roman Empire, this little country on the east of the Mediterranean has been the scenes of wars and revolutions. Yet from the point in the south up to the north, it is only 200 miles long and nowhere more than 50 miles wide. Yet today the Jews are spending millions of pounds building a national home there. And on the other side, the Arabs, with 300 million Muslims at their back, are fighting fanatically for what they consider their natural rights in the country. What is it that causes so much trouble in Palestine? In thinking about Palestine, it is important to get rid of the idea that it has ever been a country as we understand that word. As you can see from the map, in the beginning of history, it was just a corridor between the mountains and the sea, joining the two great empires of Egypt and Babylon. And up that corridor, the trade of the two countries was carried in camel caravans like this. And in the plains of the corridor, where fought most of the battles that the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians waged between each other from the very earliest times. The other people which has always used this corridor are the nomads from the Arabian desert. Now a nomad is a person who has no fixed home, but lives in a tent and wanders about finding pasture for his flocks and herds. And his herds consist mostly of camels. And it was as one of these nomads that nearly 4,000 years ago, Abraham came down from the north into Palestine. The book of Genesis is very accurate in its description of nomadic life. For instance, we read that Abraham passed through the land, although the Canaanite was still living there. And that is exactly what happens today. When the Bedouin, as the nomads are called, cross the Jordan into Palestine, they don't stay there or settle in one place, but they move about, breaking and pitching their camp, just as Abraham used to. The camel is supposed to be the oldest domestic animal in the world, which perhaps accounts for the supercilious expression of this one. The sheikhs themselves, and of course Abraham was a sheikh, live in great tents. And their life is as simple today as it was in Abraham's time. For instance, the sheikh will sit through the heat of the day in the door of his tent, ready to welcome strangers or to settle the disputes of his tribe. There is a great sheikh's tent, one of the largest tents in Syria. And this man here today rules 10,000 people. These are two of his sons. Then hospitality to a sheikh is still as much part of his religion as it was 4,000 years ago. You remember that when Genesis says that 3 men of God visited Abraham, that he ran unto his herds and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to his young men, who killed it, and then dressed it and cooked it in butter and milk. And Abraham stood over his guests while they ate. And that is exactly what happens today when a sheikh wishes to honor a stranger. He will kill a sheep or a kid and give it to his young men, who skin it. And then they will cook it in sour milk, which is what you see in those great bowls. In Arabic it is called a leban. And afterwards in the evening, when the flocks and herds are driven into camp, all the young men who've been out with them since dawn come to the sheikh's tent and share the feast, because a meal at which meat is eaten is still in some sort a sacrifice. And then through the night, the sheikh will sit telling stories of his ancestors, as Abraham must have told the stories he learned in Babylon. The story of Jacob wooing Rachel is so exact in its details that it might happen anywhere in Palestine today. You remember the book of Genesis says that Jacob went on his journey and came into the country of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in a field, and 3 flocks lying by it. And Jacob said to the shepherds, Know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And behold, even now his daughter Rachel cometh with his sheep. And when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, he went near. And he rolled away the stone that was at the well's mouth, and watered the flocks of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and told her that he was Rebekah's son. And Rachel ran and told her father. And when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him. And Laban kissed Jacob, and embraced him, and took him to his own home. And then you remember the rest of the story, how Leah was first given to Jacob for a wife as the elder sister, according to Bedouin custom, and Jacob would have done service by looking after the flocks and herds of Laban. And then he would have had a great tent of his own, and become a sheikh in his turn with a large family. All these boys here are the sons of one sheikh. His wives live behind that great rug in what is known as the harem. And on the right in a minute you'll see the slaves. Bedouins still have slaves, although now they are really hereditary servants who have lived with the family for many years. They are, in law, free. This one here is the coffee slave pounding coffee. Jacob's family would have been at least as large as this. And then when Rachel joined his tent, she would have done the work of his house, grinding corn and sewing his clothes. And we read that Jacob increased exceedingly, and had much maidservants and menservants and cattle and asses, until it must have been that there was no room for him and Laban in the same country. And then Jacob set his wives and his sons upon camels, and came down into the land of Canaan. In Canaan he lived first at Shechem, and then at Hebron, and from Hebron he was driven down into Egypt by famine. We have not attempted to tell the story of Joseph, but Egypt outside the towns must be the same today as it was in his day. The pyramids to Jacob and his tribes would have been antiquities of about 1,000 years old, and the Nile, then as now, flooded the country twice every year, so that there might be famine in the rest of the Near East, there was always corn in Egypt, as Jacob had heard. The boats on the Nile, on which the corn is brought down from the Sudan and Upper Egypt, are called feluccas, and are much the same as the boats used at that time. And you remember that Joseph collected corn as the sand of the sea, until he ceased numbering. And you can tell from the primitive instrument that this old man is using, that their methods today are very much the same. And this granary just outside Cairo must look very much like the granaries which Joseph used. The Israelites themselves settled in the plain of Goshen, which is a fertile district on the east of the Nile Delta. And it is thought that when they first arrived, the pharaohs of Egypt were of the same Semitic race, called shepherd kings, and that the Israelites were allowed to lead the easy nomad life of the half-settled nomad.